Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're decoding the actual mechanics of effective storytelling and transforming it into a practical toolkit you can use to drive action. Look, whether you're leading a team, selling a product, or just trying to get your point across, facts and figures alone rarely change minds. Stories do. So we're going to dive into some fascinating real-world examples to understand exactly how a well-crafted narrative works on the human brain.
Picture this. You're on a 5-day rafting trip down the treacherous rapids of the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. Your group is basically a bunch of unruly CEOs and celebrities, including actor Pierce Brosnan and motivational speaker Tony Robbins. And they are completely ignoring safety rules. They're throwing water bottles around, just acting reckless. Now, the river guide, Richard Bangs, knows they're heading straight toward Lava Falls, which is a deadly Class 10 rapid. Someone could literally die. He needs them to focus immediately. But instead of yelling at them or quoting safety statistics, he tells a 3,000-year-old myth about an ancient Egyptian king who was chased by wild dogs and forced to make a deal with Sobek, the crocodile god of the Nile.
Now, lecturing these incredibly powerful billionaires would have absolutely failed. It just breeds resistance. Honestly, it probably would have resulted in them throwing the guide overboard. But storytelling, that is captivating. Bangs told them how the river completely destroyed the ships of those who failed to respect the crocodile god. And you know what? That suspenseful story changed the group's behavior instantly. They fell into this deep silence, strapped in, and navigated the deadly rapids flawlessly as a team. The story achieved what facts never, ever could.
So, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the Trojan horse strategy. Second, the 3-part story structure. Third, heroes and drama. And fourth, epiphanies and connection. All right, section 1, the Trojan horse strategy, sneaking in the message.
Just like the ancient Greeks hid their army inside a giant wooden horse to breach the gates of Troy, a great storyteller hides their agenda right inside a compelling narrative. It essentially smuggles your hidden message, your request for action, straight into the listener's heart, without them even realizing their mental defenses have been completely lowered. For a great example of this, let's look at restaurateurs Mary Sue Milliken and Susan Finnegar of the famous Border Grill. When it came time to train their staff, they didn't just hand out some boring, sterile recipe manual. No, they used the Trojan horse strategy. They told this incredibly vivid story about wandering a beach in the Yucatan at 4 a.m., stumbling upon a tiny taco stand, and spending hours learning all the vendors' secrets. By embedding their passion for authentic ingredients inside this fun adventure story, they completely bypassed the usual employee apathy. They turned their staff into passionate, word-of-mouth marketers who literally couldn't wait to share that exact same story with their customers. Let's move on to section 2, 3-part story structure, building the framework. According to Robert Rosen over at UCLA, you really must hook your audience with an unexpected challenge. Then you provide an emotional struggle to keep them invested. And finally, you deliver a surprising resolution. Think back to our crocodile god story. The king faces a sudden challenge with the wild dogs. He struggles with impossible choices: the dogs, the raging river, or the crocodile. And the resolution surprises us when the crocodile actually saves him but demands respect for nature in return. If you mix these steps up, or if you leave out the struggle entirely, the brain just tunes out. So the crucial point here is that while this 3-part structure is a totally necessary vehicle, it goes absolutely nowhere without an emotional engine. As film executive Stacey Snider wisely pointed out, the best stories come from the heart, not the head. No amount of technical brilliance or structural perfection is ever going to compensate for a lack of genuine emotion. You have to move people to make them act. Which brings us nicely to section 3, heroes and drama, igniting the emotional engine. We are going to unpack the 4 emotional fuels that power that engine, starting with the immense power of empathy, followed by the gripping nature of suspense. Fuel number 1 requires a hero we actually empathize with. And empathy means we feel their pain. We don't just pity them. Consider a story about a young boy in Boston with a severe degenerative illness. He couldn't walk, but one day his father brought out this massive, custom 6-wheel training bike. The boy got on, pedaled for maybe a minute, and just fell right over. Now, the narrative tension here builds immensely because his father, he simply watched from the window. For weeks, the boy repeatedly fell, and the father never lifted a single finger to help him. The neighbor watching all this unfold, who happens to be the speaker of our story, honestly thought the father was an absolute monster for not rushing out to rescue his struggling son. But finally, the boy succeeded entirely on his own. He pedaled 20 meters, turned around, and he and his father shared this incredible, triumphant smile. The father knew the boy had to become his own hero to survive his future. This story was so profoundly powerful that the speaker later used it to win over a tough executive at Columbia Pictures. When they asked if he was afraid of taking on a massive new job, he told this exact story to prove that, just like the boy, he understood that true failure only happens when you've refused to get back up. And speaking of tension, the king of pop himself, Michael Jackson, perfectly defined our second emotional fuel: drama. Back in 1991, Michael Jackson invited a Sony executive to his home and showed him a large glass terrarium. Inside, his massive pet snake, Muscles, had a tiny white mouse completely cornered. But the snake wasn't striking. It was just waiting. Jackson explained that the snake was intentionally letting the tension build. You know exactly what's going to happen, but you don't know when and you don't know how. It's the anticipation, the uncertainty, that shifting balance of power. Jackson pointed right at the tank and said, "That is drama." It's that irresistible burning question of what happens next. But drama isn't always about life or death in a snake tank. It can be deeply, deeply personal. AMC president Charles Collier used his own childhood failure, the deep regret of basically wasting his parents' money by barely trying at his piano lessons, to dramatically challenge his complacent staff. By actively admitting his own personal failure, he created this intense, dramatic tension in the boardroom. He was essentially warning his employees that if they continued to just coast along, they were risking the very survival of the network. It was relatable, it was highly vulnerable, and it was incredibly dramatic. Let's head into our final section, Section 4, Epiphanies and Connection, Winning the Audience. Our third fuel is the aha moment. This is that magical, sparkling instant where the listener suddenly connects the dots exactly as the speaker intended. It's the precise second the Trojan horse opens up in their mind, and they get to feel the thrill of discovering the truth totally for themselves. NBA legend Magic Johnson and his partner Ken Lombard created a massive aha moment for Sony executives once. They were pitching the idea of building a movie theater in South Central LA. Naturally, the executives were completely terrified of gang violence. But Magic revealed his aha moment. He wasn't some outsider. He was a local hero who truly understood the community. To prove it, they shared a story about being surrounded by 35 gang members at the construction site. Instead of fleeing, they stood their ground, demanded respect, and literally offered the gang members construction jobs. They completely diffused the showdown by creating true, authentic community ownership. And that theater went on to become one of Sony's most profitable locations. And that brings us to the fourth and final fuel: connection. Connection moves the story from me to we. It happens when an audience completely shares your pain. Think all the way back to 2005. Chad Hurley and Steve Chen were at a party in San Francisco shooting videos they really wanted to share. But uploading them to the internet was this incredibly slow, complex, and agonizingly frustrating process. Because they shared this completely universal, everyday frustration, their story was highly relatable to everyone. When they were pitching to investors and the media, they didn't just sit there and talk about back-end code. They said, "Hey, we are just like you, and we absolutely hated this problem, so we fixed it." That simple shared connection of pain helped launch YouTube into a total global phenomenon. They had 100 million daily views by 2006 and sold to Google for $1.6 billion shortly after. So when you put it all together, the crucial point is this. By combining this three-step structure, challenge, struggle, and resolution, with those four emotional fuels of heroes, drama, epiphanies, and connection, literally anyone can transform boring data into a captivating narrative. You bypass those mental walls and you drive real, meaningful action. So before you give your next dry presentation filled with endless, boring bullet points, ask yourself this question. What is the Trojan horse story you need to tell tomorrow? It's time to stop lecturing and start building your own emotional engine to truly change minds. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and honestly, I cannot wait to see the stories you tell.